This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on major bills in the budget session of Parliament. The participants are K.S. Sachidanand Murthy, political analyst, and K.V. Prasad, journalist.
As expected, the budget session of Parliament, some major bills are currently under discussion. Some have been passed and some underway. The first and foremost, of course, is the budget provision which the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman announced was a direct tax Vivad Se Vishwas bill, which of course has been introduced and Lok Sabha has cleared it. It awaits parliamentary nod in Rajya Sabha. Meanwhile, two ordinances which have been cleared by Parliament, that includes the Mineral Law Amendments Bill and the Insolvency Code amendments to the major bill. In addition to that, the Major Ports Bill was just introduced in Lok Sabha today. Mr. Sachidanand Murthy, if one looks at the broad picture, the government is giving a very strong legislative push on the fronts to rev up the economy, especially at a time when the world is facing an economic downturn. And India, of course, also has to grapple with this thing. First and foremost, the direct tax Vivad Se Vishwas Bill, aimed at mopping up additional resources, especially before 31st March, because the government's aims and objective is some 4.3 lakh cases are pending in various courts on account of tax disputes, which could be resolved, and total amount in the years is 9.32 lakh crores. So how do you look at that?
I think this is a logical culmination of what has been done over the last 1 year, because the government had progressively looked at the enormous backlog of litigation which was a legacy issue from the previous governments, and also which arose mainly because of the implementation of demonetization and switch over to GST. So there has been a big backlog. As you rightly mentioned, there are 500,000 cases which are pending. If you remember, the government said very rightly that the power of appeal of the various tax authorities, income tax as well as indirect taxes, limits were raised, so that if the dispute amount involved, say, 20 lakhs, then from one stage to the next stage, it was raised to 50 lakhs. So that the concerned department had to agree, or the parties concerned had to agree, that the decision subject to a financial limit was the final one. Otherwise, there are 8 or 7 stages of appeal which would have gone consuming a lot of time and money. Even for the tax assessee, it was a big nuisance. Each appeal meant more expenses and all that. Then the government last year introduced similar Vivad Se Vishwas scheme for indirect taxes. Old cases of customs, excise, service tax as well as GST. And that had a very good response. So the case load was reduced, the revenue for the government came, and also assessees had a great sense of relief. There was a sense of finality. So based on all this, the finance minister in the latest budget announced the scheme for direct taxes, which again involved companies as well as individuals who are facing income tax demands, both arising out of demonetization, monies deposited in banks as well as regular disputes. So she has given a very liberal scheme where if the assessee pays the tax amount raised, no other penalties, no other interest, nothing, then the case will be closed. So this is a one-time opportunity for the assessees and also for the department, that if the assessee pays the money, no questions will be asked, no further prosecution will be done. So it's been a very good scheme. And also a lot of government companies are also involved in these disputes, because as you know, about 65% of the litigation is from the government or against the government.
In fact, the Prime Minister did mention it on more than one occasion that the Government of India itself is a big litigant in many cases. Somewhere you should have an interministerial coordination.
The tax departments are the biggest litigants.
In fact, the figures the government placed in Parliament, the bill says, as on 30th November 2019, the amount of disputed tax areas is 9.32 lakh crores. And considering that the actual direct tax collection in the financial 2018-19 was 11.37 lakh crores, the disputed tax areas constitute nearly 1 year's direct tax collection. So it's a substantial amount, and of course tax disputes consume copious amount of time, energy and resources, both on the part of the government as well as taxpayers. So I think if the government decides it's time to move on.
Also, we must notice that in the last 6 years, the Prime Minister is repeatedly telling officers, departments, that please reduce your litigation. But also there's a safety-first attitude of officers. Suppose they refuse to go in appeal against an adverse verdict against the department. Then later audit questions will be raised, motives will be attributed to them, they can lose their pension. So the safety first option is to go for an appeal.
In that case, I remember one of the speeches the Prime Minister did mention, there could be a room for judgmental error as against some decision which is taken not with so much of a bona fide intention.
I know he said that, but unfortunately the system is like that. The rules are like that. And if somebody makes a complaint, even if it is an anonymous complaint, then the officer will have to spend his retirement years fighting those cases. The thing is, the moment they ask the law department, okay, we'll go ahead. So to give them the legal immunity, both for the officers and to the government, this provision was brought in as a law. Because the government has the powers to introduce schemes, announce it, but then they decided to give it the cover of a parliamentary act on the legal thing, and the officers also will be confident. And also, for a tax assessor who is facing this demand, for him, a scheme does not give the same kind of legal protection which an act of parliament gives, so that there will be no further vexatious harassment by any source. So there's a complete finale for this once he agrees to pay the demand rate. Of course, there are exceptions.
The government has made already data available, or the tax rates, and I think even the income tax department has come with more than 50 frequently asked questions, which actually gives you a detailed presentation as to what can be done and who are eligible and covers. The other thing, which of course was the ordinance, and today Rajya Sabha passed the amendment to the insolvency law, which of course is an amendment to the IBC itself, which was introduced in 2016. So many amendments for a bill so recently enacted. I think one of the reasons it says to replace the ordinance, of course, is all to make it in sync with times, to adhere to the Supreme Court orders both in letter and spirit. And I think it's basically to ring-fence successful bidders of insolvent companies from facing criminal proceedings for offences committed by the previous promoters.
This amendment was very much required because, it's again a dispute between two wings of the finance ministry. Now, the finance ministry had brought in the bankruptcy and insolvency code so that it will help banks to recover their dues and allow companies which have been run badly or had run into trouble to be sold, so that there is a finality to their indebtedness and the NPAs and all that. But what happened was another wing of the finance ministry, that is the enforcement directorate, said that many of the promoters had actually indulged in money laundering, the assets, and siphoned off funds, and so they had indulged in all criminal activities. So the assets, companies, and the new management would be liable for prosecution by enforcement directorate under the very tough new money laundering law. So those who were buying these companies without knowing or being involved in the so-called criminal acts, they said, no, how can we buy it? And there was a big dispute on one of the steel companies, a power company. So the dispute, so this thing that it could not be solved at the ministry or departmental level, the government decided that it should be given legal sanctity so that any buyer of stressed assets who was not involved earlier in the management of that company is completely given immunity from any prosecution.
He or she is not held liable.
He acquires also will not be liable for attachment by the enforcement directorate. The enforcement side of the government is not happy with this because they say that by giving immunity to the new buyer and allowing him to take away the assets, the old management going scot-free because there is nothing for the government to recover, which was the duty done through money laundering. It helps the ease of doing business, and it gives some confidence to the investor that there is a legal this thing, because one of the biggest worry issues which have been raised by business leaders with the Prime Minister has been that there is a lot of tax terrorism, tax harassment. So this again is a very good measure by the government, saying that the new buyer is not liable.
In fact, I think it also says the interest of home buyers is to avoid frivolous litigation, streamline corporate insolvency resolution process, and aimed at to provide protection to new owners of the loan defaulters. So I think the whole idea is to streamline many issues, as you pointed, the red flags that had come up both interministerial and within intra-ministry issues. The other ordinance that got replaced today, because I think March 13th was the deadline, and to Rajya Sabha also cleared the Mineral Law Amendment Bill, which again paves way to offer coal blocks of mining through prospective licenses come mining. So this is again something which was in the works and allow FDI and promote in this sector.
This is another legacy issue, especially which involve a lot of court litigation, orders of the Supreme Court, which again, because the ease of these captive mines was that they had to be used for productive purposes, for use these coal mines for generation of power, use the minerals for industrial activity and all that. But what had happened was, each time the mines were sold, the new owner will have to get more than a dozen approvals, almost 20 approvals. So which means each approval is contingent of other approvals. So it means that sometimes the full lease period would be expired by the time you get all the approvals. So the government realized that this is a legacy issue contaminated by litigation and wrong interpretation of laws and all that. So that's why it has brought a finality to this, so that many industries will survive. They will be able to be productive.
There has been some opposition to it also in the fact that because of the environmental protection is an issue which even the former environment minister has been talking of it, because I think there are certain issues which they think the government is fast tracking which may not be interesting the environmental protection.
I know that, but then environmental protection has been a big issue, big controversy, because the industries say that once a license is given, the government sells its assets or leases its assets, then to hold up the exploitation of such a mine because of environmental issues is wrong, because the government should have thought of that beforehand, before announcing that these plots will be leased. So I think this is again where the egg comes first or the chicken comes first. I think the government has decided to give some clarity on this. And because one of the big complaints about the power sector is the plant load factors have come down to below 50% because most of these captive mines are not being exploited due
the coal mines because of the regulations.
Regulations.
Of the other sector, which is the subject, the statement of objections of the bill, which now becomes Parliament Act, and once the President gives an assent, it becomes a law, replacing the ordinance. It says the mining license in respect of 334 mines of iron ore, manganese ore and chromite are expiring on March 31st this year, 2020, out of which 46 are working non-captive mines. So it has been observed that some states have initiated action to auction these blocks. However, the mines allocated through auction can start mining only after obtaining as many as 20 clearances from different government agencies. The bottleneck which you referred to, it takes a hell of a time to get one set of clearances or one clearance, and as you said, they could be in chain or some of them can move together. But knowing the way pace at which government and different agencies work, it's quite a drag.
And it was very unfair to expect a lessee to get all the clearances, a set of the government which is being leased. It was government should have done everything, checked that it was environment clearance and everything was
all the required clearances can be given. Only then you can put it for auction. Absolutely. And not the other way around where you first take an auction out of the deposit and then move around.
A way of India growing up in its ease of doing business and in governance issues.
Today again, the another bill that was introduced in Lok Sabha was the major ports thing. I think when the cabinet had cleared this bill a couple of weeks ago, this was to replace the 1963 Act, because today we have 204 minor ports and 12 major ports, and 90% of exports and imports are handled by ports. And the government says that basically try to reduce logistics and cost, and in many private players, and one of the statements today the minister said while introducing the bill in Lok Sabha is that to make the public sector ports compete with the private sector ports, because private sector ports are run differently. Of course, there has been some objection from members, especially in the way the government is changing the nomenclature on the board. But the government says we want the trade union or the labor representative to be the real labor representative and not a representative who is not a labor, something to that effect, to which objections were trade unions may or not have a role. So I think this again is an issue when the debate takes place.
It's an important reform, They were called port trusts. Because that time the idea was that they would be functioning as public trusts. But then now they are going to be called authorities. And also authorities with a president, with a chairman, deputy chairman and a board member. And there will be representatives from 3 critical ministries, the state government concerned, independent directors, and everything is defined here, how it functions. Because it's basically streamlining the management and functioning of these port authorities. Also, another thing we must notice is, by changing the corporate structure and other things, ever the government wants to offer some part of their equity and convert them into and realize the potential of its investment becomes easier with these amendments.
And I think at the time when cargo movement is such a big thing, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on major bills in the budget session of Parliament. The participants were K.S. Sachidanand Murthy, political analyst, and K.V. Prasad, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website newsonair.com. You can also follow us on the News on AIR app for updates. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.